Good morning. I'd like to prepare you for the panel interview. And before we get into the panel interview, I'd like to just do a quick review of our dialogue from yesterday. The learning that we had in this theme for the conference, I make no apologies for learning, was reinforced from Friday afternoon in our red bead experiment. The way that our colleague Jim Manley and Jerry Brown facilitated that is a little bit different than the way the good doctor would do it. But we learned several things. I learned something new every time I watch it. And we had the opportunity to hear from Tim Higgins yesterday morning in what we labeled initially as the Deming 101. And Tim talked to us about the many components that are part of the overall philosophy and the practices, and the way Dr. Deming urged us to transform our world. We also had the opportunity to hear from Kentaro, who suggested that technology is not the solve all human problems solution that it's often made out to be, that the focus on people is so important for us. We need to start with what do people need to transform. We also had the opportunity to hear from Carol and David Schwinn, that opportunity to learn from their experience and to hear their experiences in helping ensure that no community should be poor. This idea that Dr. Deming articulated throughout his work and throughout his life is around the difference that we can make in our communities, however we define those communities. And I think about everybody in the room has probably heard of the community in Flint, and what's the impact of quality or a lack thereof in a community. Think about the economic impact of a decision to save cost, and what are the impacts of our decisions long term. We also had the blessing to learn as well from David Langford. We're going to have a chance to connect with David as part of the panel here in a few minutes. This idea of what do we learn and why do we learn, and the connection to the appraisal process that really can't be improved as much as it should just be abandoned. And I have to tell you, a personal observation walking through Pratt & Whitney Rocketdyne out in Canoga Park, California, one day I walked by a conference room and looked in, and on the whiteboard inside the room was a note that said exactly that. Why improve that which should be abandoned? They didn't refer to it, but I knew what they were talking about, because I too have been a victim of that process. So we also had a very rich experience of hearing from Cliff and Jane Norman, their experience in implementing so many aspects of Dr. Deming's work and their experimentation and implementation of ways to extend their learning from Dr. Deming. Very rich, and we're going to ask them to join the panel here in a moment. And then what was I think to me the best part of the day yesterday was the learning that I had from the people at my table. We had a chance to be in tables with people that we perhaps have never met before, and yet we had a chance to learn from each other about how to use these ideas and concepts and what they mean to us as individuals. So the continuum of what we began on Friday afternoon through all of these presentations and dialogues that we had yesterday are part of the learning that I'll make no apologies for. I'll say thank you very much to all of our presenters and our speakers. And so let me please introduce our panel for the discussion this morning. We're going to ask Cliff and Jane Norman and Carol Schwinn and David Langford, if you would please come to the podium, and let's give them a hand as we welcome them. If you would please. And there is one microphone to share. And I'm going to do my best to play Phil Donahue. And I'm going to bring the microphone to you, but I'll hang on to it when you have questions. I'll start with a couple of warm-up questions, and then we'll spend the rest of our time together until Eric stands up and waves at me from the back of the room or wherever he is, that it's time to, oh, thank you, Eric. So, if I might, this is the way I'll begin. I'm just going to ask each of our panel members to share what's the one lesson that you think made the greatest difference in your practice that you learned from Dr. Deming. And Carol, you're closest to me. Would you start?
Sure.
Please.
Do I grab this mic? Is
Yes.
that the idea?
And there is enough slack in that cord. Thank you.
That, of course, is a really tough question to point to one single thing, but I'll just say what came to my mind immediately was probably appreciation for a system. I think that was so much a guiding part of our work over time, sort of looking at organizations as systems, of course, but then looking at whole communities as systems, and then sort of looking at the universe as a system. And so, you know, I think that made a profound impact on me personally, on Dave, and our work together over time. Yeah, I think appreciation for a system, that would do it.
Thank you. Cliff.
I would absolutely agree with that from a professional standpoint. The idea of the organization viewed as a system is absolutely something that has changed everything that we do relative to the people that we work with. But on a personal level, it's having your ignorance under suspicion constantly. And Dr. Deming was a model of continual learning and the curiosity he exhibited in all things. When you read his books, you'll see everybody there referenced that he learned from. And that was made a huge impression on me as well as I think others in this room who were able and fortunate enough to be in his presence.
Jane, please.
Well, I wish I would have gotten to go first because I feel like I'm a record. I think the work that we've learned to do with the system thinking and integrating people into a system is probably the most powerful part that we've been able to impact people. And when you think of a system, I guess a nice way of saying it, if you actually run an organization with a system map versus an organizational chart, when you start looking at the people that you need to get rid of, Cliff has some examples in industry. I have an example in healthcare where if you go into a hospital or a clinic and you go to the restroom and it's filthy, what do you infer from that? Yeah. And who takes care of that on the organizational chart? Yeah, but who takes care of that on a system map? Those support processes are just as important as those driver processes up there who look at the company and try to lead them and influence how we run and design the company. So I think when you put the two of those together and mesh them, that becomes really powerful, that there's no one in our organization who is not as valuable as the next person, because if we miss the one that goes next, there's disaster. The impact is more than we really expect.
Thank you.
I have to go back to that concept I presented yesterday of critical mass. When Deming talked about that, I felt like I'd been let out of prison because we were kept thinking, oh, we got to get the majority on board, or we got to do this. And no, you just need square root of the organization, or you just need 5 things or less that you're working on in terms of initiatives or aims in the organization. And it's a very freeing concept when you think about it. And I've seen that one concept transform organizations and transform leaders, because they begin to realize, give our time and attention to the people that are really trying to do something, really trying to make things happen, instead of always trying to placate the naysayers. and spend all our time, bringing those people along. You know what? If they're going to be naysayers, they're going to be that forever. So if the more you can keep expanding what's good instead of getting rid of what's bad, all of a sudden your organization starts to move. So.
Thank you, David. I have another quick question I'll ask the panel members to answer to the best of your abilities. And I'll give you a moment to think about this. If you could ask the good doctor one question today to explain something that you still are seeking to understand, what would that question be? David, I know you're fast thinking on your feet. Would you start?
I'm going to give it to somebody else. I'm not
It's
that
okay to
fast.
pass.
I'm not that fast either.
Here, I'll take it.
Here.
As we, Jane and I particularly, we use like Roadmap for Change and several other videos where Deming explains his philosophy and so forth. And in the 5 Deadly Diseases put on by Encyclopedia Britannica, he states in there, about Japan and how wonderful it all is, and they're living better than we are. And my question to him, quite frankly, would be, as Einstein said, we only need a data point of 1 to cause us to revise or rethink our theory. And the Japanese in the lost decade, the disappearance off the market, totally, the revamp of the electronics industry, basically owned by design in the United States, Japan is nowhere to be found. So what would he think about that, and what would he say about that relative to his thinking in 1980? I think that's something we have to answer for. The other one that bothers me when I go through it is I go through his chain reaction, which we live by. Jane and I are invited to healthcare centers in Sweden. We want to cause a chain reaction to go off here. We want to see quality improve for our patients, and we want to see costs go down. But at the end of his chain reaction on page 3, it says jobs and more jobs. Now you get to that, and you start looking at the United States, and you say, where are the jobs and more jobs? And actually, it's a global situation right now. There are jobs and more jobs, but those jobs are being created in China and India and all the rest of it. And that's a very global reach that I don't think Deming was looking at in 1980. He was talking about jobs and more jobs in Flint and Detroit and all the rest of it, and that basically disappeared. And I think that if Deming were to be sitting here right now, I think we'd have to have that conversation, and I think Dr. Deming would be talking about the global reach and all the rest of it. And I think those are the kind of things we need to think about.
Thank you.
The first thing that came to my mind is, why would I ever ask him? I'd love to ask him what he's been learning. I mean, he was certainly the consummate learner, and I consider myself to be a little bit of a learning addict. So I would love to know what he's been learning. But I think the most pressing question I would like to ask, given the divisions in our country and the divisions around the world and the violence and the hatred and the mean-spiritedness, I would like to ask him, so what do we do now about how do we learn to live and work together across difference?
Thank you.
I think all of us have had an experience that Deming talked about once, and Cliff and I talk about it quite a bit. He says somebody was telling him what great success he had had and his impact in Japan. And then he said, yes, but I stopped by India on the way as well. His failures. And, to me, we learn the most from failures. And we tend to focus on the positive things and the good things and the things we learn. But I would really like to hear from him about those failures and what he really learned and how it impacted him and how it caused him to think differently and how he approached it when he ran into those types of things. I think we all have that. And his approach and how, you've got to pick yourself up and you've got to say, okay, then that person or that group or that organization isn't ready yet. But how would he help us with that?
Thank you.
I'd like to know what refinements or what changes he'd make in the system of profound knowledge, because he was the consummate learner and basically he wrote the paper on the system of profound knowledge over a weekend, but it took 80 years of experience to be able to write that over a weekend. And we all take, you know, the 14 points in the system of profound knowledge like it's the gospel, but Deming was constantly updating things, thinking about it, processing differently. And I'd like to know, you know, today, how would he modify the system of profound knowledge or to include it with many of the things that we're encountering today? I think he would. So.
Thank you. Surely we have a question or two from the audience now. Who can I bring the microphone to? I'm on my way.
I just wanted to say, what you said reminded me of, they did a study on how to reduce staph infection in hospitals. And they found out, gosh, if we kept it clean, we'd reduce staph infection. And so it really points to the stuff you're talking about. I have a question, though, and that is, it seems to me that the Deming model and Deming method is focused on really creating efficient systems. And I'm wondering, where is the role of innovation, and how does creativity point to this? Because sometimes I think if you focus on this, you could go down the path of making just what you're doing super efficient. And I wonder how you can figure out how to keep that, create innovation.
Thank you.
I'd like to answer that one. We work with improvement teams all the time, and we like subject matter experts, but we always bring in the de bono methods. Two things, the 6 hats, for one, because we don't like just brainstorming, tends to go into groupthink when it's open, giving time people to work as individuals, creating that, and it goes much faster. But the other part is 2 things that are integrated, that one of them comes from the improvement guide, and it's called the change concepts. And those change concepts are change ideas that help you get out of the box. And De Bono talks about it in his lateral thinking. And the lateral thinking, being able to take an idea or a group of ideas and package them together into a new change. One person thinks that the way to change it is this way, and another person this way. If we look and see, well, what change concept is that? Many times people use automation, but moving the steps closer together is a change concept. Standardization is a change concept, but many times people use that as their project. They'll describe, we're going to standardize it. No, don't stay so focused on what we're going to do and how we're going to redesign it, but just say that we're going to redesign it, and then look at those 72 change concepts. They are amazing. I've used them in many, many industries, and it really gets you out of the box so that you're creating something new. Anybody else?
Thank you, Jane.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that Deming was all about innovation, new products, not just efficiencies. You know, I think sometimes he gets unfairly tagged as being just the quality guy, but he was fascinated all the time in his seminars about new speakers coming in, talking about new ways to think about things, breakthroughs, and really good at giving people credit. But, you know, I use Russell Akoff's idealized redesign thinking, and in education we call it Imagineering. So anytime we have a situation, I often get people to sit down and say, if you could do something not constrained by time or money, what would this look like? And we just sit around and just really try to just free think, you know, if we could do anything we want, what would we be doing? And then re-engineer back to the present. So a lot of times people say, oh, well, we can't do that. But what part of that vision of the future could you pull into the present? You can do something. And when you start with that critical mass again and say, well, we can do this in this, all of a sudden you start to change a system in a different way. So.
Yesterday, when Jane and I were showing you production viewed as a system, the organization viewed as a system, we took Dr. Deming's 0 stage, and that 0 stage is where we go out and we start looking at what customers need and all that in the marketplace. Within API, we do a lot of work with Dr. Kano and the Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers. And Dr. Kano introduced us to the idea of the need that drives consumers to the organization. And so we defined the quality as the ongoing matching of products and services to a need. And Jane and I, when we teach this concept, we usually show a picture of an abacus and a slide rule and a calculator. And if I were to ask you, what's the need? What would you say? Yeah, just handheld calculations particularly. 1967, the people who made those slide rules, and some of us are old enough to have used them. You know, if you'd have walked up to me in the 8th grade and you saw my slide rules sticking me in the face in my pocket, you would ask me, Cliff, what do you want in the way of a slide rule? I'd say, well, you know, could you get me a holster or something? You know, I'd be very constrained about, I'd be looking at the attributes of the slide rule and telling you how to improve that. In 1967, K&E Calculator, who makes the slide rule, they produced an annual report that said in 100 years what the world would look like, with dome cities and cars gliding on air and all sorts of futurist stuff, wonderful stuff. The one thing they didn't predict was the handheld calculator that came out that very year and totally wiped out their business. And so when we talk about quality as a business strategy and focusing on the need, we're literally looking out at what's driving customers to our organization, getting back to your question specifically, and saying, how can we replace, totally wipe out what we're currently doing? Because if we don't wipe it out, somebody else will. Somebody else will put us back to zero very quickly.
Ditto to what David said.
I have another question from the audience for the panel. I'll hold it, Jim.
Okay. Yeah, I just a question and a comment. To comment first, the latest issue of Harvard Business Review has a lengthy article about why performance evaluations are so bad and how they're universally rejected now and how Jack Welch was totally wrong on forced rankings, which I thought was humorous 30 years later, you know. But the question I have is there was another article that made me think about your comment about jobs and more jobs. And I would kind of wonder what Dr. Deming would think. The ratio of value creation jobs, the people that actually create things of value, service and products, is shrinking in relation to the number of management jobs in organizations. So management jobs are on the rise, and value creation jobs are on the decrease. So what do you think Dr. Deming would say about the jobs and more jobs being created are all management type jobs that are not value creation per se?
Thank you, Jim.
Anytime I hear a question like that, that was at a conference and people were asking Deming questions, and somebody got up and asked an excellent question to the master like that. And Deming looked at the ceiling, and then he looked at the floor and crossed his arms, and there were 300 people in the audience. Things got very quiet. We always wondered if he could actually hear the question. So everybody's looking at each other, and finally the guy at the microphone says, "Dr. Deming, do you have an answer to my question?" And he says, "It's not the question it's not the answer that's important. It's the question, and you've got that right." So I think that's what he would say.
And how you try to get yourself out of that. What do we have to do differently, you know? And how our overall system is impacting us and constraining us, I think. In a lot of ways, I think people feel constrained and don't feel like they can do things, yet they have ideas, but they don't really put them through to actually make those things happen. But, you know, think about it. We've got all these cupcake wars and all these little food trucks and things. We've got a lot of things that are going on. They're just not in a General Motors or a Ford standpoint. So they're far more fragmented. So I don't know if we're really looking at the small fragmented pieces.
Thank you, Jane.
Pass.
It is okay to pass. So we have another question.
David, on that one, there was a lot to think about in the question.
Here's another question.
Dr. Deming talked about breaking down barriers. And for a lot of us in our jobs or our professions, there's a lot of barriers that are there from government regulations, whether that's education, hospitals, other industries. So what approach did Dr. Deming take to breaking down those barriers that are sometimes hard barriers there by government or other external forces? What approach did he take to break down those barriers to make improvement in an industry such as that?
I get this all the time, especially in education, because everybody's doing it to us, and there's this and that, and the other thing. So, but when you get people to think about their circle of influence, so you start with the largest circle over which you have influence, and that's where you begin. And again, it's back to this critical mass thinking. Yeah, you may not be able to change all the regulations coming down from the federal government or the state or any other agency, that's the EPA or anything else that's coming back to you. But if you start to look at where is my circle of influence, and you start actually thinking about what you can do and how you can deal with things at that level, all of a sudden people get sort of empowered. They realize, oh, we can do something. And if you're being hit by regulations and things coming down from the federal government, what I always tell my folks is we're going to do it to the letter of the law. We're going to do whatever we have to do, but that's all we're going to do. And then we're going to get back to innovating, thinking, and actually doing the core business of what we're trying to do. And that always releases people because they get so hung up on, oh, we got to compliance and we got to get this and we got to get this done. And okay, we're going to do that, but we're going to spend the bulk of the time back innovating and doing what we're supposed to be doing. So,
Thank you, David.
Well, I have one point. A phrase came to mind: lead, follow, or get out of the way. And sometimes we get in the way. And sometimes we have people around us who have great ideas and they're ready to lead, but they need a follower or a few. And sometimes we need to follow, and sometimes if nobody comes up with the idea and we have an idea that's worth testing, we should try to test it. So when we have those so-called constraints, Paul Simon's pretty smart. He said there's 50 ways to leave your lover. I'm telling you, there's got to be at least 2 ways to get around some of these things. People figure it out.
Thank you.
Dr. Russell Akoff, when we talked about that systems view idea, there's the focus of the system, and then he talks about the containing system. And your question usually leads me to that, is that, what's the containing system that could be driving things that are really not useful for the system at work? And you see this in healthcare all the time. We hear it from healthcare people, all sorts of things get in their way. But what always surprises me, and it really shouldn't by now, is that they'll tell me, well, this is bothering them and that's bothering them, whatever it is. And I say, well, have you talked to these people? What do you think the answer to that is? No. And, Woody Allen said that, 90% of success is showing up. And you can get another 5% if you're prepared to play. And then you can get the rest of it if you're actually dressed for the occasion. And I'm just stunned all the time, particularly in this age that we live in, where you can push a button and get the email address, the phone number, papers. You can find out all sorts of stuff. And this goes back to the presentation on technology yesterday. It's there, but it's fundamentally unused. And I'm just stunned all the time. And so I think people in government, when I get to meet them one-on-one, they're reasonable. They don't want to do stupid stuff to you. And if you go talk to them, it's amazing. They'll say, that's really stupid. Yeah, I agree. We're killing people here. People are getting diseases because of this ignorance that you've put upon these folks. Can we do something here? Now, I do have a theorem that I've come up with over the years, and my colleagues in API, Tom Nolan and the rest of them, they said, Cliff, it's rather brilliant, and it solves a lot of problems for us. I said, and it's this. Jane and I were working with a group of people, and these were smart people, and they were doing something really stupid. And I told Jane, I said, there's got to be something wrong here, and out of that came the reward system. So if you see reasonable people doing something stupid, they usually are getting paid. You know, reasonable people don't do stupid things. You got to pay them so they can get over the guilt. You know. So it's amazing when you look behind the scenes what's going on there. And unfortunately, when you get into government, somebody might be getting paid. You know, and it might be very difficult to remove that. But showing up, for God's sakes, show up. You know.
Thank you, Cliff.
I would just say that it seems to me the most, everything Dr. Deming talked about was breaking down barriers between people and between departments in the university system, between disciplines. People say that, you know, hard rock scientists can't talk to soft rock scientists. You know, I mean, the barriers are just everywhere. We talked a lot about driving out fear. People are afraid to talk across boundaries, has a lot to do with reward systems. People in organizations, because of those reward systems and how they're paid, how they're compensated, learn to compete with one another for what they consider to be zero-sum rewards. And all of those things get in the way of people being able to work together across difference. That's not only true in organizations, it's true in communities, it's true everywhere. Fear probably being the largest single factor.
Thank you, Carol. We have another question.
Thank you all for being, hello, check. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate your time. I know that I'm starstruck, so I'm sure several folks here are starstruck, but my question is really about millennials and making quality seem sexy, for lack of a better term, to them. A couple things. What do you suggest keeping that in the mindset for them in their way of expectations going into the workforce? And what examples have you seen that show that they really have a quality mindset in their way of thinking?
Deming often got this kind of question, like, you know, is there something inherent in the culture of the Japanese that enabled them to adopt these principles faster, or other organizations, or, you know, millennials is another really good example. And he often said, there's no differences between cultures in the things that really count. And it took me about 20 years to figure out what that meant. And when you get down to the things that really count with millennials, and quality is one of them. It's a core value of how people think about things, and how you're treating people, and you're actually listening to people. And as I've traveled the world, no matter what cultures I've encountered, intrinsic motivation is at the heart of what they do. And so if you're giving people more control over their own environment, you're allowing them to cooperate at a higher level, you're supporting you know, the work that they do, you're making the work challenging, and it's highly meaningful, that's a recipe for intrinsic motivation in any group, any culture.
Thank you, David.
How many people here are millennials? You know what I would say is, if I were you, number one, don't feel like you're a victim. Real important point. Number two is when you actually go for a job interview, you do the interview. Don't forget that you need to interview the organization you're with, because there are good organizations, and some of the sponsors here are that, who really desire to help you feel like you can contribute and give you opportunities to do that and not put you in a box. That's kind of what you're doing. We were baby boomers, and we were so loyal that, you know, we knew we had to, you know, go the steps and be trodden down, and it's kind of just what you had to do. And we have 5 daughters, so we know what you're talking about. And they have expectations, but you also have to be willing to contribute. I've seen a lot of millennials that I've had to manage in a few companies, and they want you to give them stuff before they're willing to contribute. And I'm sorry, I still come from the earning standpoint, And, you know, you have to show what you got inside. And I can see it right away with people who say, well, I have an idea. If you have an idea and people respond to you, then you're in the right place. If you don't have an idea and they won't let you test it and they tell you put your head down and get back to work, you're probably in the wrong place. It's kind of like what somebody said, what Dr. Deming told Cliff. If you're not working for somebody who's letting you learn and teaching you, then you're in the wrong place. Go find someplace else. So don't be the victim around that. I don't feel like it's happening to you because it's there. It's there.
Thank you, Jane.
I've got to say that I've reflected on this a lot. And basically, as Jane just said, we have 5 daughters, and we're soon going to get our 5th son-in-law. And I have to say, in watching all of them, I'm just so proud of this generation, literally. And the millennials are catching a lot of heat right now. And I remember when I caught heat as a boomer, and I caught it from my father first. And I was working at a place called Norris Industries, and my dad was an electrician, and he was laid off at Bethlehem Steel in the town where we lived. And he came to work at my plant. And from the rest of his career, he was known as Clifford's dad, you know. And he walked up to me one time, and he said, son, you know, he said, you're a foreman here, and I've been watching you, and you raise your hand way too much. Well, that was our generation. We knew that we had to get involved. In order to make a difference, you got to show up, you know, that kind of stuff. And my dad looked at me, he said, you know, son, if you'd have served in the Army like I did, you'd have learned that volunteering is not healthy. Now, that's the greatest generation.
World War II.
And I thought, wow, you know, and then he watched me as I was going to college because I worked full-time, and I was working swing shift at Norris on the clock when I was an inspector. That's how I got involved in quality. And every Thursday night was payday on swing shift. And so in order to study for all my exams and so forth, I'd always take Thursday night off. My dad would walk over to me and he'd say, son, those are bad habits you're getting into. I said, what do you mean, Dad? He said, I've never just taken off work just willy-nilly. He said, you should be in there at work. I said, no, I've talked to the foreman. He's going to have to be sending people home. He knows I'm home studying. I said, you never went to work full-time and worked full-time, did you? No, I guess you're right about that, you know. But to that generation, the job was everything. It was the gold watch. It was all that, you know. And then this group shows up and says, okay, it's all that, but I still want to contribute. I want to raise my hand and all the rest of it. And now I got millennials, and I listen to my own children, and I'm so proud of them because they say, I want to contribute. You know, I want to be here and I want to make a difference. And I want my boss to tell me what we can do to make a difference. And it gets to what Maccabee was saying yesterday. Give me the reasons I should follow you. That's what they're saying. And as leaders, we're obligated to do that. It's just that simple. These people can be steered and targeted. I just read an article yesterday. Well, they're all entitled. I don't believe that for a nanosecond. I know these people personally. These are great people. And it's just another generation looking at another generation, and I think we're obligated, if we're in a leadership role, to give them the reasons, help them understand their responsibilities, you know, and go right through those 5 R's that we're talking about and the important relationships that they can help us with in the organization, and make sure we recognize when they make contributions. People in this generation live for this. If you can't do that, then they'll look around and find another job, because they've learned from watching all of us, this is temporary. We've taught them, you know, this is temporary. And if you all can get married to a job if you want, but you're selling yourself tickets. This might be here today and gone tomorrow, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to develop me. So I'm hoping we're answering your question, but I'm proud of this generation, very proud of it.
Thank you, Cliff.
I would just say I couldn't agree more, and I think I wish Dave was up here because he's in the classroom all the time with millennials and people of all ages, but certainly young people. And man, it's tough out there. I agree. Dave's students are, they've got full-time jobs. They're married or they're single parents. They're trying to take care of their kids. They got 3 jobs. They're out there killing themselves trying to pursue the American dream, which is not necessarily as available as it once was. So I think it's tough out there. And I hope desperately that the contribution that that generation will make, who have great purpose and great passion and care about things like the environment, that they will begin to influence our culture in directions that it really needs to go to create opportunities for everybody.
Thank you.
Just add one more bit of evidence to how great this generation is. My dad's generation was drafted into World War II. Think about this for a minute. Those kids in Afghanistan, what are they doing? Raise their hands, you know? So when you want to get down on the millennials, just remember that. I mean, we're filling quite nicely the armed forces with volunteers, people willing to go and sacrifice for the rest of us. I mean, this is amazing stuff when you look at it. But again, the military is what? Purpose-driven. They want to be related to that. They want to be able to make a difference.
Thank you. We have another question.
So yesterday, Tim Higgins mentioned, and this was kind of something that you said at the very beginning, I think, that Dr. Deming's dissertation was on quantum physics kind of theory in a Newtonian physics era. And I keep coming back to that because what I'm hearing from you, and this is my first Deming conference, is it's almost like a religion that you guys are talking about. I mean, it's not just he chose manufacturing to teach and as his medium for teaching, but what you're talking about is really looking at the world and looking at business in a different way. And I just wonder if you would talk about that. It's kind of a broad question, but I'd just like to know what your thoughts are on that.
Thank you, Nancy.
Just what you reminded me of when you said it's like a religion. I was thinking yesterday, I think it was, somebody else might confirm this for me, but I believe that once Dr. Ishikawa, who was the head of the Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers, was once asked about the difference between Japan and the US as it related to the work that they were doing around quality. And why was it that it was so difficult to adopt those ideas and those principles and practices in the US? And as I recall, I certainly wouldn't be quoting him, but he said that, that there's an underlying belief system about people. And in the West, we have this Judeo-Christian thing about being fallen people and being sinful people and being at heart not good. And that in the Eastern tradition, people are believed to be good and to have come into this world with purpose and with certain skills and talents to be able to contribute, right? And to me, there's just a dramatically different worldview that he was describing and a dramatically different worldview that Dr. Deming brought. And when you look at, I'm sure what you're picking up on from us and from the other speakers and other people you talk to, that we share a passion that he had for people and making a difference and trying to create a world that really worked for all people. And so I think that what you're seeing and feeling is a dramatic shift in worldview that he represented. And that if it was, more widely adopted as a shift of worldview in our world, wouldn't it be a different world? I mean, if we really believed that people came here wanting to do good, wouldn't it be different? We would be asking people when they come into our organizations things like, what did you come here to do in your life? What is your passion? What is your purpose? And how does what you care about fit in with what we're trying to accomplish as an organization? And this is not putting down systems maps, but we would having people saying, here's what I believe and here's what I can contribute, as opposed to drawing a systems map and saying that's your box. I mean, it's a really different way of thinking, and I love system maps, but it's it's about a worldview.
Thank you, Carol.
I was tickled because as you were going through your question, you mentioned the religion idea. Don Peterson at Ford Motor Company was asked the same question about why did he adopt the Deming philosophy. He said it was fairly simple because it's kind of like the golden rule. But I think our own individual transformations as we think about, what caused us to actually, start really buying into things that we really hadn't thought about before. And for me, Deming started working to me at the technical level. So here I am sitting in the group, and I'm a certified quality engineer, and Deming gets up and says, get rid of mass inspection. And I'm raise my hand, kind of stupid, raise my hand. He brings me up in front of the whole group. He says, now tell everybody about how you do sampling plans, And I jerked out this card. I had a 105D card in my thing. Every quality engineer has one of those. He said, what do you do with this? And I said, well, I work with the Navy, and they figure out what % of the missiles and stuff they want that aren't going to work, and I help them figure that out, And he says, total nonsense. Yeah. He says, where'd you learn that? Business school, engineering school, wherever you learned it, you need to forget it, And then he says, where did you get that from? I said, I don't know, I thought God created it. He said, I know the people who created it. They did it to put people like you out of business. Now sit down. And I'm sitting there looking at my card thinking, I just had my lunch handed to me here in front of 900 people. The guy that was with me, he had a question about 20 minutes later. He said, Cliff, why don't you ask him this? I said, hell no, why don't you ask him that? I've already been on stage here. But it was so traumatic to, it's something you believe in technically, to have it just destroyed in front of you. And then it kind of opens you up for the next thing. Well, maybe this ranking thing isn't all that great. And you start thinking about, and you understand variation. Once you understand variation, then you realize how silly that stuff is. And so it was a gradual process, from the technical to the social. And then finally, when he stands there and he says, if you have people working for you, they deserve to have joy in work. I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I got a bunch of people nailing pallets. How the hell are they going to have joy in work? Really? This guy's been sitting at the university campus under a tree, I mean, give me a break. But as you start really thinking about that, how can somebody contribute this nailing pallets? I mean, you got to really start thinking through that. And that's what Deming was trying to do to us. So.
Thank you, Cliff.
Well, I know the first time I went to the Deming conference, I thought, I'm an educator. What's this thing about manufacturing and quality? But I swear, I sat there for 4 days and I thought, he's talking to me. He's talking about learning and classrooms and never-ending process and intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And I was looking around the room, and there weren't any other educators at the time that I knew of that were in the room. And that was the transformation it began to make. But I think his physics background, more I learned about how he thought about things, really affected his worldview about things. For instance, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is actually based in Newtonian physics, that given enough force, you can force a rat, a man, a mouse, a machine to do something against its will. And then that got translated into Skinnerianism and Watson in the 1950s and became behavior modification programs. And that, through brain research, that's all been proved false. That it works just the opposite of what you think it does when you apply extrinsic motivators to a system. So, when you went to hear Deming, you were really hearing 21st century management thinking. And just now, people just beginning to touch on this stuff that he was talking about 30 years ago. So.
Thank you, David. Jane, would you like to have the last word as we are running out of time?
Well, thank you. I was thinking as you were talking about a religion, I thought, well, it's a set of values, and you believe in them, and that's what and a purpose. And we've worked in lots of industries. I doubt if we've been in any industry. I've been in the food industry, I've been in distribution, I've been in manufacturing, I've been in computers, I've been in software, I've been in the healthcare. you know, this stuff actually works, and all of it, all works a process. The variation, the control charts, they're like magic. You take some data and you put it there and you'll say, what happened on May, da-da-da-da-da, and they'll go, oh, how did you know? Well, the chart told me. I'm not clairvoyant. No. And working with people and taking time to talk to them and learning from them and letting people contribute. And working as a system and not being put in a box in the system map, but allowing people to pick as many boxes as they want. You know, the jobs that I used to have to put a salary on and a range, I had to look at several jobs because we'd bundle them together, you know, to make sure that they were being paid a certain way, but they had jobs that nobody else did, you know. But because they wanted to. I can do this too. Okay, well, let's test it. Well, that didn't work out. Oh, you're going to make me do it. No, actually, I'm not. Well, we'll work that one out. But I could do this instead. Well, let's test that out. Well, that worked really well. Well, yeah, you can do that too. Okay? So I think, you know, it gives you a set of principles that you work around with people, and people do want to make a difference. And when you connect all the theories together and you start seeing the other theories, that pictures that we showed at the end with all profound knowledge and all the contributors, and going back to people earlier that we didn't even realize, that's what we have to understand, that it's not just what Deming said, but all the other people that are contributing to what he said that really makes it make sense, makes us sound like we're in a religion. But actually, it's an epiphany. Oh my gosh, look at this. This is exactly what he's talking about, and here's some theory that attaches to it. I wonder what he'd think about this theory that they've got here. I bet that would fit so nicely because. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks to our panel. Thanks, Carol, Cliff, Jane, David. This is one of the most interesting parts of the conference for me, is to hear people respond to these kind of questions. So the several hundred hours of preparation for a presentation, that's easy compared to off the cuff, how do I answer some of these tough and challenging questions? So panel, thank you very much. We have a 10-minute break that we'll be taking, and please be back in your seats in 10 minutes.